Good evening and welcome to the launch of Overjournal issue 2. My name is Ángel Luis González, and together with Aidan Kelly Murphy and Julia Gelezova, we are co-editors of Overjournal. In today's program, you will enjoy a brief introduction of issue 2, followed by presentations by Rashi Rajguru and by artist Audrey Gillespie. And we will finally reveal the cover and the back cover of Overjournal issue 2. Overjournal is the critical journal of photography and visual culture for the 21st century. It's a new periodical publication, an online platform that proposes its readers a more wholesome, honest, and critical observation and enjoyment of photography. We publish commissioned texts and artworks alongside interviews and opinion pieces. And we aim to create the ideal channel for an open and global discussion about the context in which the discipline sits, and not just about the output of artists, exhibition venues, and publishing houses. Overjournal launched its first issue in July 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, getting representation by a global distributor in October, and securing funds for further issues in time for Christmas. It's a rather rapid progression at a time of stillness and introspection. But then again, this is not per chance. The project was conceived years ago, and over the last decade, through our experience and as cultural producers, booksellers, photo book collectors, publishers, designers, writers, curators, fair and festival goers, it has continued to slowly ruminate. We observe the market and slowly carve a space for us to host these thoughts. The journal has now reached audiences from Zurich to Ho Chi Minh, from Tokyo to Los Angeles, and many places in between. Furthermore, the feedback provided by you, our readers, endorsed our guiding principles and aims, and we remain eternally thankful and grateful for it. Issue 2 is bringing with it new changes, consolidating the efforts and shaping what is to come in this decade. Our editorial team grows from 2 to 3 as we welcome Aidan Kelly Murphy to the team. The pool of contributors and informants keep growing as we seek to engage with relevant practices from all corners of the earth. These collaborators, together with the peer review panel, help the editorial team to shape each issue. Of course, our door always remains open to all artists, writers, thinkers to bring forward their own work. As well as this new issue, we have coming very soon a brand new website that will become a contemporary space for to further the conversations that are initiated in the journal. It will also allow access to past content. The website will become a place to discover new practices and ways of thinking. Issue 2 is a host to a broad conversation around technological developments, both contemporary and historical, and their application and effect within visual language, with a particular focus on the representation of communities. In the case of the former, we see discussions on automation and algorithms in text by Duncan Woolbridge and Louis Bush, with Louis sharing work from his own project, Ways of Seeing Algorithmically. Technology and its use in the creation of the M87 black hole image is discussed by Yvette Hamilton and Rashi Rajguru, who look at the impact of this non-ocular imagery, a theme that reappears when Kwasi Ohene-Ayeh reflects on the practice of Kelvin Hazel. These conversations around technological impacts comment on the future of photographic practices and its impact on aesthetics, particularly around audience expectations and color choices. And color and its appropriate use after the fact in photographic colorization of archival materials is explored further by Dr. Orla Fitzpatrick, with Jean Curran discussing the historical impact of Kodachrome and color theory in both the golden age of Hollywood and her own practice. Communities, cultures, and their representations conform an integral part of the practices featured in this issue. From Iris Hasid, look at the Arab female students attending Tel Aviv University to Federica Landi's discussions on the mediation of reality and her journeys to Burkina Faso. Support and adequate representation to the LGBTQ community is present, with Donald Talbot discussing the work of Audrey Gillespie and Northern Ireland's political context, and with Roberto Tondopos' project on the Chunta in Mexico. Photography's role as a tool for protest can also be seen in the work of Irene, Antonia, Diane, Reece, and Hoda Afshar, two very different projects and preoccupations that show the universality of visual culture as a tool for political critique. The back cover, a space dedicated in every issue to feature prominent and current politically engaged art practices, presents the work of the Archive of Public Protests with an iconic image by Raphael Milach. Finally, we close the issue with Sue Rainsford's response to Bindi Bora photographic practice that highlights the role of language within visual culture. Accepting for a moment that we know the value of the arts and society for society, subsequent discussions around how that value is calculated remain back-channel conversations. These conversations are brought to the fore with Camille Levesque and Anna Ehrenstein, looking at the perception of value around the arts and artists, and with Julie Chun discussing photography and their development as a collector, and the development of the collectors in China. So with writers, artists, curators, and critics from 5 continents sharing their thoughts and projects around 256 pages, issue 2 provides a broad cross-section of contemporary thinking around photography and visual culture. And while definitely they are not by any means the end threads of the conversations they spark amongst our readers, they are merely commas, not full stops. We encourage you to delve further into the practices shared and critical thinking discussed. And above all, to keep safe and stay critical. And now I would like to invite Rashi Rajguru to take on the mic and to continue with her presentation.
Hello, everyone. Right, I'm gonna share. Okay, so thank you everyone in advance for listening. So this text that I've written for Over functions as a sort of introduction / summary to an ongoing project of mine called Never Before, which looks at the famous black hole image, which was created by a group of scientists known as the Event Horizon Telescope Collaboration, was presented to the world back in April 2019. The image, as well as its production, its dissemination, its mutations, is a central point for a deep, sprawling inquiry into the publicized image, into science communication, into the narrative of progress and its relation to aesthetics, or the shifting definition of objectivity over time, something which I think has a big relationship to photography via scientific image making. So I'm really interested in the things that are folded into, but also very much squeezed out of this black hole image, an image that was internationally unveiled and has been supposedly seen by billions of people. This interest of mine is definitely heightened by the acknowledgement that science communication inevitably intersects with visual culture and builds from its entanglement with science fiction and cinema, etc., to grow an increasingly dramatic vocabulary that can be readily used by some of the lazier online pop science articles, sorry, it is true, but also from some of the most influential figures as well. Since science communication is a really major gateway for knowledge dissemination, and a lot of it operates by using aesthetic elements of the spectacle and language of the photographic, it feels like it's worth slowing down to unfold and stretch out. So in keeping with the non-linear, non-definitive structure of the essay that I wrote, this presentation will swing between a chronological summary of the black hole image's trajectories, but then also these caveats and thoughts that jut out quite organically whenever I'm preparing this material. At times, sometimes the image on the screen might not feel like it directly illustrates what I'm talking about, but that's just a way to hopefully subtly expand our relationship to some of these topics. So to start, before we reconnect with the image, I want to go over the idea behind its subject. Given the nature of my research, I'm really going to try and give the least dramatic description of a black hole that I can. So black holes, as we call them, and that's something that I'll come back to later, are an astronomical entity in space-time that are totally real, natural, albeit extreme consequences of nature. There are regions in space-time where usually a massive star has ended one cycle of it in its life, and it has so much mass that it ends up gravitationally imploding, bending the fabric of the space-time around it, creating this central point from which the gravitational reach, anything within its gravitational reach, won't be able to escape its natural pull, essentially. The boundary of that area of no return is referred to as the event horizon. And to get some concept of scale, the event horizon of the black hole in that famous black hole image that we're going to see would run around our entire solar system, including Pluto. Compared to planets in galaxies, black holes have a very short public history, starting off with Einstein's theory of general relativity only in 1916, 17. Although the idea of light being pulled back in on itself has been voiced at least as early as 1784 by John Mitchell, who referred to them as dark stars in a letter to a colleague. And then there's also the core notion of inverse gravitational relationship. So like the idea that the further you are from an object, the less effect it will have on you in terms of gravitationally. That imposed at least as early as 1645 by Ishmael Buliadis. And then of course, there's always the potential for ideas to be had and exchanged much earlier without being recorded or archived. So black holes are almost impossible to directly image for many reasons. The image that I've got on the screen now is a really great example of some of the instrumental and environmental effects that get in the way when astronomers try to image objects in deep space. But at least with this example, there is a galaxy which emits light. A black hole emits basically nothing. So there's nothing that they can use visually. So astrophysicists have found ways of seeing black holes through their indexicality, focusing more on their gravitational footprints, such as noting the peculiar movement of other visible objects, which seem to be affected and influenced by something that we cannot optically see. Andrea Ghez has been working on tracking the peculiar objects of stars, the orbits of stars, that are strangely close to the very center of the Milky Way galaxy, supposedly our galaxy. Her team has spent years tracking the movements of these stars to produce really solid evidence that the only thing that could hold enough mass to even affect the trajectories of all of these massive objects has to be a supermassive black hole. And recently, she actually won the Nobel Prize in Physics, along with two others, for her contributions to this area of research. Another reality of trying to see black holes, particularly ones that are at the center of galaxies, is that they are basically bleached out by all of the accumulated light in the rest of the galaxy. The image in front of you is actually an optical image taken in 1975 of M87, the exact same galaxy that EHT zoomed into in 2017. The status of black hole vision is really important, I think, for us to look at and consider before we go back to the black hole image, because science, and particularly natural science and astronomy, has a very entangled relationship, including a major influence on ideas around objectivity through the visual representation of things. Over the centuries, science, and particularly Western science, has created countless catalogues and atlases of objects, even stars and planets, usually drawn or illustrated by the scientists themselves, which has then led to this ricochet of a history within scientific culture, where at times it's thought best that the scientists draw exactly what's in front of them, or at times it's better to draw the most ideal version of that object, which means omitting any differences or imperfections in the reference that they're working from. So photography naturally gave room to the mechanical image, a process which supposedly rids the document of any infiltration by the scientist, any tainting of authenticity from prior knowledge, as the camera is supposed to remain neutral. But of course, the reality is that the image produced is still wrapped in the materiality of the instrument that produced it. Lorraine Dustin and Peter Gallison have conducted a really comprehensive research on this timeline of the idea of objectivity. And they also bring it to the now by arguing that we've moved from the mechanical image of photography in the camera to what is now considered the interpreted image, where validation has swum back into the hands of the human, but only really the expert, who is considered the best person to sift through these growing mounds of computational and digital or digitized images to select that which is most correct, whatever that framework entails. Now, to finally actually get closer to the black hole image. The black hole image was produced by an international group of now over 300 scientists and field experts known as the Event Horizon Telescope Collaboration, or referred to them as EHT. This research of theirs focuses on producing essentially the best ever images of black holes to date by building on decades of research and really pushing the boundaries of radio astronomy, data processing, computational imaging, to create what is being referred to as the first ever image of a black hole. To do this, there's two main stages. The first, the actual observation of the source, and the data collection, and then the computational imaging. So for the first step, EHT utilized a technique in radio astronomy where you can connect multiple radio antennas to all simultaneously record a radio source, like a black hole. There's a really neat law in physics where the further away two radio antennas are from each other, and the further they can essentially zoom in to space, they can increase their resolving power. So EHT then pushed this to a planetary scale by connecting existing radio telescopes that are already stationed across the Earth's surface, from the South Pole to Hawaii to Spain. Since these telescopes are continents apart, they can't be physically, or they're not physically connected by fiber optic cables. Instead, they're synthetically connected using time. The data collected by each telescope is time-stamped using these really high precision atomic clocks, so that scientists can eventually merge all of the data from each telescope down to the exact wavefront and have a really accurate data set. This whole stage includes so many challenges for the science team that I'm going to skip over for the sake of time, but trust me, there are many, and feel free to read my text to find out more. After the data is collected and merged, they then begin to construct an image from data. So the actual coverage from this huge telescope network is really patchy. The director, Shep Delman, says in a TED talk that it's like taking an optical mirror, smashing it into pieces, and then putting a couple of the pieces really far away from each other. Out of the 8 telescopes in that network that you can see in this image, just before I change it, only 5 can actually see the M87 black hole region. So essentially they're working with only 10 data points from which to then construct an entire full image. So they use imaging algorithms to fill out the gaps, which is the majority of the image. Because of this requirement and the need to, because of the that radio astronomy is right now, the need to implement priors and frameworks to these algorithms, there's many tests and exercises that are done to validate all of the results and to either reduce or eliminate the human bias, depending on who you're speaking to. One member of EHT, Andrew Tail, says that this is probably the most vetted image in the history of radio astronomy. So after loads of blind tests and group comparisons, the team whittles it down. I'll show you, just even here, like the multiplicities of all the different kind of possible outcomes that they were working with. They whittle it down to these final sets of images. And then we have this final image that was decided as the best to represent this entire project. This final image is a compression of almost 5 petabytes of raw data down to just a few hundred kilobytes. The European Space Observatory's online image archive, which is where I always get it from, offers this black hole image free to download in various sizes, but also swelling all the way up to 183 megabytes for what's called a full-size original. It even transforms from its square beginnings into a vast landscape. You'll notice that up until now, it's always been the square, but now it's been kind of given this extra negative space. I would like to just note here that if you go past all these news articles and look at the actual science papers, multiplicity and multitude is just baked into this whole research project by the nature of radio astronomy and also what these guys are doing. Certainly something that the scientists themselves highlight. Even the final image that we see here is only ever shown once in the report, and it's only shown alongside other variations and is referred to as a representative example of the images. I think that language is super important to notice, as this is how it's being communicated by the scientists themselves before it goes through science communication, or the umbrella of science communication. So we have the unveiling on the 10th of April, 2019. The image was unveiled to the public world, where various institutions around the world held press conferences to present the image to their respective media outlets. I thought it was really interesting to see them mimic the orchestration of the radio telescopes back when they collected the data in 2017, with this very synchronized performance of displaying the image to the public. I got very interested in the hands of the scientists whilst they were explaining the black hole. So as part of my practice, I kind of did a selection of them. And here's a little preview. Shortly after the unveiling, the image was disseminated through online news platforms and then social media through the form of memes. And this one is my absolute favorite. Then over the rest of 2019, the image was revisited again and again, heralded as the most important science image of the year, with the researchers winning various awards and accolades to celebrate their groundbreaking success. And to just think about that initial dissemination of the image, the knowledge that something is to be visually circulated, I think, increases the spectacle of that material. Davy Johnson writes about that part of the success behind a pointed publicized image, which she refers to as an image event, is generated by the viewer's subconscious awareness that other people are also going to see that image. It makes sense. Information doesn't transfer solely from the act of observation. The medium and the direct context in which an image is seen holds equal power in that knowledge transfer. The suggestion of a new addition to the supposed collective consciousness helps make a publicized image feel even more valid and significant, especially when it's already related to certain realms of societal influence like science or politics. There's also this idea that really came from Aidan, another contributor for the journal, who was also my editor for this piece. So shout out to Aidan. The audience is also complicit. Our immediate positive engagement with the image, something which very much becomes quantified and assigned value by certain groups of people, perpetuates the idea that it is for the expert or the media outlet to draw a line around our visual understanding of the world. But it's also kind of funny because those who stand as mediators of objectivity are just as human as you or me, and are just as influenced by things like Interstellar or Star Wars. Many scientists mention that science fiction played a key part in their initial curiosity towards physics and astronomy. So there's a couple of quick caveats I do think are worth mentioning. The black hole image is not an image of a black hole, but it is the image of its shadow and immediate activity happening around the event horizon. The orange that you see is artificial completely. The image was originally captured, well, processed as black and white, and then the color was added in later. It was specifically chosen orange to better convey heat, intensity, and movement. And the image depicts 230 gigahertz of radio wave energy that would otherwise be completely invisible to the human eye. These points aren't a critique of the process of imaging within radio astronomy, but rather highlight the lack of discussion around how the black hole image utilizes a lot of various visual currencies. By spending time in the black hole image and by looking at how astronomy images move over time, you notice that there's this really narrow communicative pipeline through which these always singular scientific images are pushed through as vessels for the narrative of forward-facing progress to end up on a cracked phone screen of a viewer. The structure, for me, perpetuates the superiority of the single final image, when in reality, these images are literally composites and are very much produced in multitude. And there's also the added confusion by the lack of distinction between simulations, visualizations, direct images, reproductive images. This is seen in most news articles that announce something like astronomers photograph star being devoured by black hole. And the main image for the article, the first one you see, is always an artist's impression or a simulation which is using a lot of artistic license, as opposed to the actual image that the article is talking about the scientists making. So I can't sit here and talk to you without talking a little bit more about the memes. That tunnel vision of science communication might bottleneck our relationship to the black hole image, but it doesn't stop the individual from building their own relationship afterwards. As soon as the image was released, social media saw a wild variety of memes being generated. The best ones for me referring to the financial instability of your own wallet, but most importantly for this research, people's bemusement at the low-res nature of the final image that they saw. And this is not surprising at all. I think it's a really fair comment to make when you look at how the biggest organizations in astronomical image making create and disseminate their images. For example, the Hubble Space Telescope. Oh, this one isn't a meme, I just think it's hilarious. So again, for the sake of time, I'm going to try and skip this not, but it's a really significant part of the essay. So I do hope you get around to reading it, and includes a really beautiful and thought-provoking work by artist Nadim Trophy, who is the first person who told me about this in the first place. So all credit to him. But essentially, there's a researcher named Elizabeth Kessler who spoke extensively with this leading imaging team at, that worked for Hubble Space Telescope, one of which I also was very lucky to interview this year for my publication, about the aesthetic relationship between some of Hubble's heritage images and 19th century American landscape painting. So this is a still from Nadim's film, which I recommend if you can access it. It's amazing. So Kessler looks into the use of the sublime by the imaging team at Hubble as a way to genuinely just get the public to resonate with the images. But of course, I think for myself at least, and I know for many people, naturally trails towards the idea of the American frontier and colonialism, etc. So, I was supposed to take this out, but it's here now. I think this is absolutely wild. At the end of 2019, EHT gifted a print copy of the black hole image to MoMA, which I now have in their collection. I don't have the vocabulary to talk about this yet, but I'm aware that I'm talking to lots of really intelligent people. So if anyone is interested in this and has some thoughts on it, please send me an email or a DM or whatever, because I think this is outrageous. But I think it's great. So black holes in visual culture. As a concept, black holes have been maintained within the public consciousness very well through science fiction and cinema, etc. A lot of commercial movies attempt to reflect back to their audience the black hole knowledge pool of their time. They tend to kind of cash in on that anthropomorphization of black holes being these kind of merciless enemies of deep space that are one day going to eat our entire solar system. They do that by animating and framing the very natural conditions, time dilation, space distortion, as modes of attack, characterizing black holes as having this very active and violent agenda. And that desire does make sense. When you look at most of historical cosmology, it's always kind of focused on finding out the harmony in the universe. And then you have black holes, which cater to that more tragic and sexy element of humanity, with that added seduction of the narrative arc of transforming something from theory into reality. They become an embodiment of the absolute, past the event horizon, and one is locked into its temporal death drive. But really, it's that idea of the black hole that permeates. For Timothy Morton, the supermassive black hole is an example of a hyperobject, those things that feel abstract and elsewhere, like global heating, but are very much right here, right now. So the last bit of research before I go. In the first major UK lockdown, I had a little bit of extra time. So I thought it made sense to just make sure that I knew the etymology of the term black hole, and I thought that would take about 10 seconds, but it led to an outrageous story that revolves around this British-grown and maintained narrative of the black hole of Calcutta. I cover this in the essay and include a really in-depth timeline in my book, but essentially, it starts with the British East India Trading Company in the 1700s during their soft invasion of India through their trading outposts throughout the land. Their main hub, which was in Calcutta, included a defensive headquarters, just marked there in red, called Fort William. In Fort William, there was a 4 meter by 4 meter prison cell that was referred to as the Black Hole. Sailors would get thrown in there when they were drunk and needed to sober up, or British traders might take local merchants in there to intimidate them during their trade talks. In 1756, the Nawab, the regional prince, Siraj-ud-Dowlah, fought with the British to take back the land and succeeded. And then any British captives were put in this black hole prison cell overnight and then released the next morning. But the story goes that 146 people were squeezed into this room, a number which is contested by most historians. But to follow the narrative, this led to over 120 deaths due to suffocation and heating and overheating. The most senior survivor, John Holwell, who at the time was, I think, just like mostly administrative officer, traveled back to Britain with a very passionate account of the event that he handed over to the government and was treated as factual documentation of this horrific event, referred to as the Black Hole of Calcutta. This event becomes the catalyst for the Battle of Plassey, which is historically considered as being that tipping point when the British East India Trading Company actually begins to usurp India, turning any financial relationships into a kind of like forced governmental takeover. The really great side story I won't get into about this monument that John Holwell commissioned himself in Calcutta that got taken down, put back up, went missing. So the story of the Black Hole of Calcutta is then used as an ideological support system, using the notion of national trauma to justify the imperial invasion and subsequent deindustrialization of India. It becomes woven into literature and journalism. You can see it like all throughout Victorian history. And I've noticed even quite interesting friends of mine, particularly some which have grown up in England, but definitely over the UK, have heard of the Black Hole of Calcutta through their parents. So you get to 1960, this is a painting by Sohan Quadri called Shiva Shakti. You get to 1960, where Einstein's theory of general relativity has been knocking around for a fair few decades, but people are still referring to it as a gravitationally completely collapsed star. And they are actively looking for a better name, a shorter name for this theory. At this time, radio astronomy is kind of cracking on. So you've got pulsars, blazars, all these different kind of large astronomical objects with that kind of Latin structure to them. They have an AR at the end being generated, like that was the norm at the time for this kind of category of objects. And you have in 1960, there was an American physicist called Robert Dick, and he was holding a lecture about gravitationally completely collapsed stars. And he knew the story of the Black Hole of Calcutta. And in his lectures, he made that connection between this astrophysical theory about something which has a boundary that nothing can escape from and the black hole prison. He keeps making this connection between the two throughout his lectures to the point where he starts referring to gravitationally completely collapsed stars as black holes. A fair few years later, I think 8 years later, you have John Wheeler, who is a much more famous astrophysicist who also worked in the Manhattan Project, which was very fun. And he was referring to these completely gravitationally collapsed stars, and someone from the audience of his lecture just shouted out, "Why don't you just call it a black hole?" Which he did, and his subsequent use of the term became transcribed, disseminated, and that's how the term black hole got put into the vocabulary of astrophysics, and that's why we call them a black hole, which I think is crazy. It says, without going into it anymore, but it just says so much about how sometimes the emotional and visual associations we have between words, the fact that the term black hole makes sense in one way of understanding this region of space-time, this extreme region of space-time, makes sense, right? So it becomes a much, that success in that association really propels forward narratives without realizing. But to just sum up, I think that this is a hardcore band in the USA called the Black Hole of Calcutta, which is great. So that's for you to enjoy as well. Ultimately, for me, it's really interesting because there's this dialogue between this supposed binary of the science and the public, which uses the language of the photographic to refer to these images. And I mean, this opinion is my own, but I do think that the world is constantly left in this really dull stupor from these incredible kinds of scientific achievements that become decorated by images that, for lack of a better term, capitalize on the sublime to increase the longevity and success of the groups and institutions behind them. I don't think it's anything malicious, but I think it's a very real cultural consequence of the economic structures behind this kind of research. Research projects need funding allocated based on factors that are strengthened by guaranteed public interest. and elements of the spectacle or the language of progress are very neat and good ways at helping to increase that. So we, as receivers of this information, are left in this very thick cloud made from good intentions, but with very murky realities. And I think it's good to take note and think about the ways of expanding it in some way or another. I think more accessible conversations about the role of publicized images could help in doing that, perhaps. Hopefully, this presentation was a little baby step into that realm. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Rashi.
Very much, Rashi.
Super, super interesting. I'm glad that I'm in this side, and I already have read the article. I can tell everybody that it's fascinating. Thanks a lot to Aidan as well, who has worked with you in making it happen.
Yes, thank you so much.
May I take everybody into another gravitationally completely collapsed star and have a bit of a non-linear narrative, and perhaps introduce you, because I actually forgot to introduce you because I was reading away. And just to mention that Rashi is a London-based artist working predominantly with image, sound, and text, holding a BA in fine art photography from Camberwell College of Art, and her work stems from continuous research into the understanding of objects and how they are defined, and how this behavior further extends to the human narration of situations and events, which becomes very clear in listening to her in this text. I think it broadens our understanding of visual culture into something a bit or further more complex. So I also would like to take the opportunity to acknowledge a few people, having thanked Rashi for this presentation, and saying that, of course, you can read the full piece on the journal. A few individuals that are joining us today from as far afield as from Melbourne, from Australia. I think Yvette Hamilton is it's online if she hasn't already gone to bed. I think I can see her there. As a contributor, I really appreciate her effort for being, I think it's 3 a.m. or thereabouts in Melbourne. So thank you very much, Yvette. Likewise, I can see Bindi Bora is there joining us from the UK, I believe, and Federica Landi from Italy, Duncan Woolbridge from the UK as well, and Jean Curran, probably from Paradise, from her little space in the countryside. I think now we take a moment. We'll introduce Audrey Gillespie, and we can enjoy her presentation, which is going to be done through a video piece. And Audrey Gillespie is an Irish fine artist from Derry, from Northern Ireland. She's currently living in and creating in Belfast, and her media include analog photography, painting, and printmaking. Her themes explore queerness, mortality and conflict, and youth and anxiety in her presented series, This Hurts. So if you give me a second, I'm going to share the presentation with you guys.
Hi, my name is Audrey Gillespie, and I'm an artist from Derry, Northern Ireland. I currently live in Belfast, Northern Ireland, where I live and work and create. I specialise in paint photography and screen print. I'm going to be talking a bit about my latest project, This Hurts, and some other projects that date a bit before that, because they all kind of tie in. Or at least it'll make sense in a while. Yeah, so I'm going to show some images and just give a bit of background to the series and myself, and kind of how the series came about. But yeah, first I'll just show some images. I got my first camera when I was 18. It was gifted to me by my girlfriend at the time, who is still my girlfriend, I might add. Yeah, I should be raging if I left that out. But yeah, so at the same time, I had only just kind of came out. She was actually my first girlfriend, and this is all kind of important because it all does lead into the series. Because it it is all about, you know, my sexuality, my identity, and kind of coming of age within all of that, and figuring out kind of where you exist in life after not really being a minority, and then all of a sudden being gay in a really small town in Northern Ireland, of all places. And if that doesn't sound morbid enough, then get ready for the rest of the series, because it doesn't get any better. But I love that, and I love that all my work is sad. I think I find no joy in making happy work. I mean, it's happy at the end. It has a happy overtone, I guess. But the work for me is really, God, I don't want to say liberating, because I feel like that's a really overused word these days. But it is very, it's a liberating series because of how it started and where it came from and where I came from, and all the people that are kind of like entangled within this little piece of my world, and how they're kind of just immortalized there forever. And immortality is a huge part of, I think, why I make my work. It's, although it isn't strictly, you know, documentary style work, it is about creating a realm of fantasy and kind of not stroking my own ego, but it is kind of playing to the narcissist in me. It is about me, it's for me, it centers around me. You know, there are lots of different characters, but they're all made up by me, and they do take place as like my close friends or total strangers, but in the end it's my interaction and my feelings and my placement within their existence. But yeah, back to kind of immortality. One of the reasons that I work in film, analog film, analog formats as opposed to digital, is kind of because of the rapidness in which digital format methods take place. Again, I don't find any joy in it, and the slow process of creating and waiting and analyzing analog format methods of photographing and image making speak to me a lot more, because they really make me care about every single picture that I make, and why I make it, and why it has to be a certain way or a certain color or at a certain time, or not at all, actually. I mean, be excited about anything, but sometimes the time is very sporadic, and I'll leave that there. But the physicality of analog filmmaking and image taking kind of speaks to a more existential level in me, and that's really about myself being afraid of age. Not so much change. I'm not afraid of change, just aging, and the idea that I won't be here one day. And like I have to laugh at myself, because I'm 23 years old and I just don't know why I think like this. Yeah. Yeah, so the reason why I take analog images is because they're real, and the only real analogy that I can kind of give for, or well, example that I can give for this is I remember having a BlackBerry, like a BlackBerry phone, and I found it a couple of years ago, or maybe it was a Motorola, whatever. I found it a couple of years ago, and I tried to upload it to my current laptop, which was like 2015, 16 or whatever, and the BlackBerry was from maybe 2008, 9, maybe less, and the images were pixelated and blurry, and I couldn't make out a single thing. And you know, it just scares me that everything in digital imagery kind of turns to ones and zeros as technology advances, and so many digital methods get left behind, and it's such a race to get the next thing, whereas it's quite a soothing process to go back and take your time, and to know that in 100 years somebody could still chemically develop my photos if flatbed scanners and projectors and whatnot didn't exist anymore, that I could still find my negative and make it again. And I don't know who that's for or why I think anybody would care, but it does get me thinking about lineage and my children. I don't have any children that I hope to have, that they might want to see that part of me. And again, that kind of speaks to how I feel about my parents, and which is why my work is just a huge just mess of my emotions, and why I so often say in artist statements and other descriptions of my work that I'm inviting the viewer into a very bleared and unclear vision of my perception of my world. And I see photography as a way of just talking and describing and just visually communicating something that I could not say in words. And I'm a bit of a terrible communicator vocally, and can a lot of the times be so emotionally closed off that sometimes photography is kind of just the way to get at the big lump in my throat of emotions and feelings and all that stuff, and to just get it out in kind of a beautiful way, because it doesn't hurt to look at it, because I always try and make them, you know, quite aesthetically pleasing, and I do think I do that for myself. But yeah, alongside the photography, I do painting and screen print, and I grew up as an artist. You know, my parents really encouraged that kind of stuff within me, and I never really planned on being a photographer. It just kind of struck me. I have a friend, her name is Megan Doherty. She's also on the Futures platform and is involved with PhotoIreland and TLP and the rest. And growing up and meeting my girlfriend, who was Megan's friend, or was friends with Megan, and seeing Megan just capture this own little sense of reality that was hers, that was just untouchable to anybody else, because she was the narrator, and we would all just put on these clothes and meet up, and friends that you haven't seen in a while would all just be there. And I wanted to do something like that, and then it all kind of spiraled into my own little thing as, you know, my life went on, and, you know, I lost some people and gained some people, and some bad stuff happened and some good stuff happened, and it all ended up just becoming my little story that I could hold on to. And Megan kind of taught me that. She kind of taught me that I was just able to harness that little silly story that is my life. And it actually started off being about drag and drag queens and stuff in a project called well, I should really know, Not Drag. It was called Not Drag, and it was about gender performance and identity and this kind of stuff. And I had newly come out, and I thought this was amazing, and oh, I was gay, and everything was like really bright and shiny at the time. And then I read The Bell Jar. Surprise, surprise. And my life got a little more hollow, to kind of give it a nicer description. And I really kind of figured out, well, not that I wanted to, but I started to figure out my placement in this world and my relationship with society, and really struggling with my identity as a gay person and as a woman, and realizing that everything wasn't so shiny after all. But again, in the way that I had seen Megan harness all the weird and unforgiving stuff about life and put them into this this mystical world that was just hers. I just wanted a piece of that, and that's how that first project started. And after a while, I started to kind of let all that go, because drag turned out to be a bit of a boys' club, at least here in Northern Ireland. I won't say too much about that, but you know, that's a bit more not political, but a bit more heavy than I'm gonna give any more narrative to. But yeah, I didn't find any growth in that project, and Not Drag soon turned into This Hurts. The more I kind of leveled with myself and just wanted to figure out more about the world and not have it be so much about other people, and turn this series inward and really focus on what it was that I was trying to say and why and what it all meant. So yeah, it's a very existential series, very much fueled by friends and colour and just really, really heavy emotions that are just hard to transcribe in words, that I just find easier to get out through pictures and paintings and imagery. Yeah, and that kind of encompasses the whole series. Thank you very much for listening to me talk, and thank you to PhotoIreland and Ángel and Julia for selecting me to be on the Futures platform this year. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Audrey, for making the video presentation. I don't know if Aidan, you want to jump in? Was there any questions that you want to that you have collected from?
None have come in the chat other than people saying how awesome Audrey and Rashi are. Quite a lot of people saying that, as well as Audrey's work as obviously I've seen what it looks like, and its layout in the journal is really something else, and it's accompanied by a lovely text as well by Donald Talbot as well. So just providing a kind of additional context and his own interpretation of it. So it's a really stunning layout for Audrey's work in the journal. I'm really looking forward to seeing it in print. So if anyone does have any questions, kind of feel free to hop into the chat if they want.
Okay, and in the meantime, we take the opportunity to, as we arrive to the last bit of the presentation, we want to share with you, well, what's in the cover of the journal. What's in the cover? We heard already what's in the back of the cover. Raphael Milach photograph from the archive of a protest. But what's in the cover? So maybe I'll try to bring you to another screen and see if I can share it with you. How can I do it without you seeing this in the meantime? Okay, I'll do this for the screen. Yeah, and so let's have a look at the, are you ready? So the cover of the Over Journal issue 2 is Jim Curran with the work on Vertigo, and we are super delighted that we can actually have this work in the journal, and of course in the cover. So thank you very much, Jim. And you will be able to enjoy a lot of the work, a lot of the images from the project Vertigo in the journal, and they look amazing, and we made our best, so they do look amazing. So yes, and don't miss it. The back cover that we mentioned was Raphael Milach with the image from one of the protesters in Warsaw. So I think I will leave it there, guys. I would like to thank everybody that has joined us today from abroad, in particular, as I know that I can see Roberto Tondopo as well is on the is assistant. So thank you very much for being there, making the effort. Thank you as well to the peer review panel. So we work with a number of individuals to select some of the papers, as it is the case of Rashi and Yvette Hamilton's, Daniel Boetker-Smith, who everybody knows, Justin Carville, Alejandro Castellote, Mohini Chandra, Irina Chmyreva, Yining, Caroline McQuarrie, Tanvi Mishra, Kwasi, Ohene-Ayeh, and Niclas Östlind. To all of them, thank you very much. I would like to say thanks as well to our new team member, Aidan Kelly Murphy, because it's been a pleasure to work with him all this time, and we wouldn't have been able to do it without him. So yes, much love goes to Aidan.
Much love back to you, Brent. Much love back to you. I just like to say a huge thank you to all of the contributors. I can see Jean, Yvette, Frederica, Bindi, Roberto as well, Duncan as well. Obviously doing a journal like this remotely, you know, pretty much all of our editorial meetings were remotely. We're, you know, ringing Yvette and what was either the middle of the morning for us or the middle of the night for you, and same with Hoda in the UK and stuff like that. I mean, obviously remotely stuff like this can be challenging, but it has been made so much easier by the dedication and the enthusiasm by all our contributors for this issue. It's made the editorial process for me and Helen and Julia so much easier, knowing that you guys and helping to kind of to highlight projects and writers that we love and are really passionate about, and we just really can't wait to get our hands on the physical version in about, you know, maybe 2 weeks or so, and then share it with all of you. So we're very excited, and thank you for joining us this evening.
I can see also Iris, Hasid, and I just don't want to miss everybody because it will be, you know.
Orla as well. Good evening, Orla. Searching through names here. Hello, Galaxy A70. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, and I think David Solo is joining us from New York. I understand. So thanks to everybody. The magazine, I can assure you that it looks amazing. It's twice as thick as the issue #1. It has improved in the quality of the paper and the materiality of the object itself. The content is incredible anyway. So I think overall it's a really impressive product, if you want to call it, but certainly something that we will hope that you enjoy. So one final thanks to the funders, in this case are PhotoIreland and the Arts Council of Ireland, that has made all this possible. And of course, thanks to Rashi and Audrey for an amazing presentation today. And we hope we'll see you all very soon. And when the new website comes and is launched, and we can actually host a few more conversations online. So thank you all, and have a lovely evening.